Joined now by Florida Athletic Director Scott Stricklin, who is done flying around the country. He's got his coach, Jon Sumrall, is not in Gainesville yet. He's working his way there. As we record this, he's about to coach in the American Championship game, and maybe we'll see if he winds up earning a playoff berth with Tulane. But Scott, what have these last few days been like for you now that the work is done? Everybody knows who you hired. He's got his coordinators, and it seems like the news has been relatively good so far, first few days of Jon Sumrall's tenure.
Yeah, well, thanks, Andy. Well, for one thing, I'm sleeping a little bit better now that Jon is signed up and ready to lead the Gators pending his Tulane commitment. It's when we were on the other side of this and all the noise was about, we won't talk around it. It was around Lane Kiffin. Mm-hmm. And we had known for probably a week that wasn't the direction the Florida search was going to head. That there had to be a time where Gator Nation understood that, but you didn't want to move too early with that because you didn't want people zeroing in on Jon and disrupting what he had going on. And you also you didn't want to wait too late, so it broke right when the day you're announcing Jon. It got pretty close. I'm not sure we timed it just right, but that was, a not surprising response from, people a fan base who for months or weeks at least had been thinking one thing to have that change. One thing they were excited about, to have that change. Anyone you put up after that initially was going to be met with some resistance. Mm-hmm. It's a credit to Jon, his energy, his charisma, his passion that they the press conference he was able to kind of get people to turn the page and get excited about him, and then hiring the coordinators in such short notice in just a couple days, and everybody said from the very beginning, including me and the others who were part of the search process, that the OC position was going to be a really critical one. And obviously we haven't announced anything as of this taping, but where that is heading is got people really excited as well. So he's checked every box possible in a very short period of time. And it's one of the reasons we're really excited about having him here in Gainesville.
Well, and I'm sure you guys helped prep him for the press conference, but how much of that was Jon wanting to kind of straightforward tackle the questions that people had about him? Because obviously there were going to be a bunch, and he didn't seem to really shy away from that when he was talking.
There was very little that he actually discussed with me anyway about his press conference and the comments. He actually asked me during one of our visits about the step down and not just that second straight hire of a group of 5 coach from the state of Louisiana, which is just such a weird Venn diagram, right? Of all the candidates out there. He actually brought that up to me, and I just, I said, hey man, it's initially people are not going to like it. And if you win enough, if you're the right guy and you have the right energy and you win enough games, it'll be a footnote, and it should not drive the decision here. And I said, the question is, can you handle it? I mean, you're going to take some flack. I'm going to take a lot of flack, but some of that's going to hit you. And, he, like me, was not worried about that, but he wanted to make sure I was aware of it, which obviously I was.
So you brought up Lane Kiffin, and obviously that was the name everybody had on their mind when you decided to part ways with Billy Napier. And I always thought that's a strange situation to be in, because I actually remember when Jeremy Foley hired Urban Meyer, and it was a thing where everybody in the country who had a job wanted Urban Meyer. It came down to Florida, Notre Dame, where I remember watching the Notre Dame plane fly into Salt Lake City to talk to him. And this one was even weirder because when LSU opened, it became pretty clear, they're going to try to go after him too. And he's leading Ole Miss to the playoff potentially. That seems like it would be an attractive place to stay. How did those first few weeks of the search go when it was obvious everybody's kind of pushing you toward this one guy?
Well, just candidly, we had a lot of interest in Lane, and how could you not, right? With the success that he's When you talk to people, to candidates who have been doing this a while, they're going to have some scars. There's going to be some parts of their career where they were not successful, and to see, Lane obviously had those, and to see the success he had at Ole Miss, that's appealing, right? Because somebody who's learned and they've grown. So it wasn't just we were being pushed to him. We were interested in him as a possibility, and I'd say strongly interested. And but at the same time, we knew we couldn't just count on that. And so we were doing our due diligence on a number of candidates. Ended up talking to nearly a dozen when it was all said and done. But it was obvious where that was shaping up, and there was a flurry of initial engagement, I would say, really positive conversations, and then the communication became a little more erratic, and the timing of when that began to occur, just reading the tea leaves gave me the impression that it's a good thing we talked to other people, and we're going to have to look at some other candidates.
Okay, so you said about a dozen, so we're talking about 10, 11 different people,
right,
who aren't Lane Kiffin.
Right.
When you realize this is probably not happening with him, how soon do you feel like Jon Sumrall is your guy? What did you need to do to get to the point where you thought that's the guy I want to hire?
Jon was someone from the very beginning that I had an interest in, that we had an interest in. He may have been the first coach we spoke with directly, not in person, but just, virtually, early on in the process. And it was almost like I wanted him to know, I don't know where this thing's going to go, but we think highly of you. And so, but I would say we started going down this other path, and we started spending a lot of time on that other path, all the while making sure we were doing our due diligence on the other candidates. And then it was probably about 10 days before Thanksgiving. So the last couple of weeks of the regular season that, we just made the decision, hey, we've got to really, we don't want anybody to feel like they're second. We need to really go in hard on 2 or 3 people that we believe, based on what we've seen so far, can be the next head coach of the Florida Gators. And Jon was always at the top of that group. And the other thing is, no one's naive. Everyone knew the whole Lane situation, right? Every candidate we talked to understood that. And there were several candidates that wouldn't talk to us early on because of that dynamic, because they're like, they're just going to end up wanting to do this with Lane. And we were clear through our, we used Chad Chatlos with Turnkey as our search consultant. He was clear with the agents and others that, nothing was a foregone conclusion. Nothing. Yeah. We definitely had a true live search going on, and Jon was willing to talk to us, and I think we both his side and our side quickly developed a comfort level and a rapport. It just was near the end of the process before it really started to make sense for both of us to go that direction.
Well, and the other part of it with Jon, I think that I don't know that all the fans understand the dynamics, because in some cases you're maybe not working against peer schools or other schools, or maybe it's just they have a good job and they're trying to decide whether they want to keep their good job or go to your job. Jon had Auburn after him. If Lane left Ole Miss, they were going to call him. I'm sure Arkansas was interested in him. How much did that dynamic play into it, especially as you got toward the end of the process?
I would say I was very aware of what else was happening in the marketplace and how dominoes might start to fall, and wanted to make sure that the Gators were positioned to be at the front of that line if at all possible. And so I was, and you're right, there was a lot of traffic around Jon in a positive way, right? There were a lot of schools making it known to him that they would be really intrigued if he came and led their program. So we were trying to be really proactive there. And there was one other candidate that we kind of felt the same about, that, because again, you don't know where this thing's going to go. And
would that be
I
a
had
person
no idea
who stayed at their current job?
What's that?
Would that be a person who stayed at their current job?
I can neither confirm nor deny that.
Okay.
But
I'll guess at it after this airs.
Sure, you're good at that. That's why you're a good reporter. I had no idea Jenny Sumrall's connection to Auburn, her being an alum. I had no idea how strong that tie was. Obviously, they had worked at Ole Miss. I didn't, he went to Kentucky. I didn't know if they were going to have an opening at this point, but you just never know. But I did know we had a great job at the University of Florida. I sensed that he had a legit interest in it, and once we made it known to him that our interest in him was genuine, I think it kind of put us in a really good position.
So you mentioned Chad Chatlos at Turnkey, and that's one of the more interesting aspects of this is Florida had not been a school that used search firms an awful lot. Jeremy didn't really use them, and you hadn't used them. You did use Chad when you hired Todd Golden. Is that right?
I did not. No, I did not.
You did not.
We
Oh,
did not use
okay.
a search firm in that hire.
Sorry about that. So you hired national championship winning coach without one. But it was one of those things that I've known Chad for over 10 years. I ran into him right before the Georgia-Texas game. He and his daughter were going in, and he was all happy because he's a Navy grad. Navy just won a big game the night before. And people on the message boards, the amount of fiction that came out about the search firm, what they do, I believe they fired you at some point. I had never heard of a search firm firing the school, but I hear that's not true.
No, we hired them, so that relationship would have worked the other way. But we had a great working relationship throughout the process. We had used Chad for some other searches. We just recently hired a deputy AD as a chief commercial officer, a guy named Michael Seeley.
Okay, that's where it was. Okay,
we used Turnkey for that. Had a really good experience. Chad was my conduit because I knew Chad, but we used some other people in their business that had more familiar with that space to land their chief commercial officer, Michael. So I guess recently we had used them, had a really good experience. I have years ago in my prior job, I used a search firm for a job, and I felt like everything that we were thinking about got out among agents, and I don't know if it was the search consultant's fault, but I kind of wondered, if that might be the case. And so I just decided a long time ago, make this circle really tight. And, the old, I think it's a Ben Franklin quote that, 3 people can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. Just
right.
The fewer people you have engaged, the better chance you have of keeping information tight. And the reason it's really important is because you don't want your cards to be out there on the table for every other school to know what you're doing. And you don't want and the candidates don't want their names out there usually.
Well, and that's what I try to explain to people about the search firm thing, because everybody thinks that the search firm is picking the coach for you, or they hand you a list of these are the guys you should look at. I know they do compile lists and that sort of thing, but I find in these high profile searches, it's more to do exactly what you were saying, discretion to use as a go-between where you can keep some information under control.
Correct. And there was certainly, Chad has a wealth of contacts. I picked his brain constantly, like, hey, Chad, who are we missing? Who's not on our list? A name would come up and he would have some, he might have already done due diligence on that candidate for a search a year ago that he could draw from and kind of shorten our homework assignment up a little bit, if you will. There's so much, and again, Chad's a pro, and I'm really comfortable using Chad. There's I'm sure other great search consultants up there, but I just have a lot of confidence in him. And I think one of the reasons you were talking about all the misinformation that was out there, I think the team we used, Duke Warner from my staff, one of my associate ADs, who was part of the Todd Golden hiring process as well, used Danny Werfel, Gator great, Heisman Trophy winner, national champion. Danny was a unique person to include, in his personal professional life. He had the time to give us and this was a pretty time intensive process. Obviously, our Gator Made program, which is like our life skills program under Coach Napier that we're going to continue, utilized Danny around the program quite a bit. We had a Danny Werfel Gator Made Player of the Month in our program the last few years. And so Danny understood the current roster. He understood kind of what the situation on the ground was. So I just thought he'd bring a great perspective, and I trusted him, and he was awesome. So the three of us were really the search committee. I had a group of trustees that I kind of used as a kitchen cabinet to bounce ideas and also make sure when we got to the point we had to get a contract approved, they weren't hearing this for the first time. They knew where we had been and why we were at the position we were. So that was really the only group that knew what was happening. And because that group kept the information so tight, it created a vacuum of news about our search, which is the way I've always felt like you should run a search. Is there should be no real information out there. But in a situation where it's a really interesting topic and a lot of people are passionate about it, when there's that vacuum of information, it creates an opportunity for people to fill it with false narratives and just things that aren't true, like the turnkey news that you said. There was another one about a donor that we gave Lane a deadline, and it happened to coincide with kickoff of his game, and we didn't need it because the donor forced us to do this. We walked away. This could not be further from the truth.
Well, and I've had some conversations with that donor, Gary Condren, who, I mean, I don't know if there's anybody who loves Florida more than Gary. And as people, so for people who don't follow Florida that closely, or maybe are fans of other schools, Gary is one of those people who is heavily involved and has been very gracious in what he's given to you guys over the last few years to try to help the program. But he's never struck me as you must do this, Scott, because I gave you all this money. He's never struck me as that kind of person.
You read that well, Gary. No one loves the Florida Gators or has been as generous to the Gators as Gary Condren has, and at no time was he have any inappropriate. I may have talked to him once a week during this process, and there were some things I told him, just Gary, I can't share with you, but there were some things I could, and he understood it. But he was not in the middle of the process. He didn't know who we were talking to when, and he had kind of understood who we were looking at, and we had a couple other donors boosters that were of that kind of same stature as far as how they have supported the program and deserve to kind of have a little bit of information. But none of our guys, that's one of the things that makes Florida really unique, is it's not a stereotypical boosters running the program kind of place that you might, the Chad Powers show might make you think
right.
is what happens. That's not what happens. And so to see Gary and others do things the way you would want from a governance standpoint, to be supportive, be interested, but not be trying to run things, and to see someone come out with a narrative that is totally the opposite of that and make them some kind of villain it's really unfortunate. And again, I think a lot of it is because we did such a good job of keeping the information tight. Yeah. People just were trying to connect dots that didn't exist and create narratives that were untrue.
Well, and your circle that you had was about as good as you could do, because I met Duke when he was the trainer for the basketball team, and when he was working with Billy Donovan, and there's not a more dedicated, loyal employee that you're going to find, and he's worked his way up to that leadership position, and deservedly so. And then Danny Werfel, I was a walk-on when Danny was a senior. That was my freshman year, and you're not going to meet many better human beings. And the thing I thought was interesting about Danny, because a lot of people who would be invited into that sort of position would be trying to leverage it or use it for something. Danny doesn't want to be an AD. Danny doesn't want to do anything with this. He just wanted to help Florida. And so I've been listening to, he's done a few interviews since all this happened. It's been really interesting hearing his perspective on it, because this was all new to him.
Yeah, he I think he was a little taken aback by how involved the agents were in the process. And the agents are highly involved in this process, not just at Florida, throughout the whole search cycle. And I think he was, and this is not besmirching all agents, but I think he was surprised by some of the lack of candor or I'm trying to think.
They play some games sometimes.
Yeah, people play games with information, and I think Danny was a little surprised by that. I think he was a little surprised by the lengths we would go to travel under the radar. and in ways that people wouldn't like necessarily notice that. And it became harder when you add someone like Danny Werfel because, he's the most recognizable of the three of us.
Yeah.
And so like slipping him in and out of hotels or airports is
you
not
got
as easy.
You got caught at least once, and I can't sell you on air who caught you or where it was, but because I can't give away who it was who caught you.
Fair enough.
But you did get caught at least once that we know of. So
at some point that's going to happen because we did get out and about and see people in the flesh. So at some point, we were going. If you think about it, if you go to a small town, a small college town, you're visible. If you go to a big city, there's a lot of people there that you could run into, even though it's a bigger city.
That's what I think about how many people I randomly run into in airports or in just in a hotel somewhere, and you guys know a lot of people, and so it's pretty tough. But one other thing I really wanted to make sure we talked about is the general manager process, where you hire Dave Caldwell, former Jacksonville Jaguars GM, and I want to talk about the timing of that process because I went on Feinbaum a couple weeks ago in the middle of the process, and I was actually surprised I didn't get a phone call from you after this one, and I'm glad I didn't. But he asked me about Lane Kiffin and the general manager process, and I said this is when I knew you guys had interviewed some former NFL GMs as you were looking for a general manager. But I also understood, and I tried to relay this on the show, that you were still in dialogue with Lane Kiffin, I think, at this point, and Lane had preferred to maybe bring his own guy, and you said, "Oh, absolutely, we'll talk to him too." And I'm curious, was there ever any talk of, "Oh, we're going to do the organizational structure this way," or was that always something you talked about with the various candidates?
So I'm convinced that what we ask head football coaches in this day and age in the SEC to do today, where they have to be the CEO of the program, in effect the head of human resources, human resources. They have to be in charge of sales. They have to be in charge of the money. I mean, what we're asking them to do is no one person can do. And Nick Saban did it really well for so long, and so everybody thinks, well, that's how you have to do it. And he's a bit of a unicorn, as we all know. So we need our coaches to coach and to lead their team. And I think we need to put somebody else in a really high-level executive as a partner to that coach to worry about everything else, including the recruiting and the rev share dollars or the NIL or the contracts or team travel, all that other stuff. We need somebody else to be responsible for all that and be a partner to the coach. And so I was convinced that going forward at the University of Florida, for our coaches to be successful, whoever we bring in, we're not going to just throw them, in the football building and say good luck. We're going to put a structure around them that gives them a chance to be as successful as possible. So I think the GM model is what makes sense there. The GM and the head coach neither report to one another. They both report to the athletic director. But they've got to work together. So you think about if you have a really heavy wagon to pull, instead of just telling one person to pull it, if you had two people pull it, you're going to have more success. So we did. We simultaneous to when we started the coaching search, we started a GM search. And the goal at one point we thought, do we want to just hire a GM and let that GM help us hire the coach? Mm-hmm. And that's certainly a fine path to go down. But a
lot of NFL teams do.
Right. Somewhat early in the process, maybe by the end of October, I realized we've got to find a match. We've got to find two people that not only will, feel good about this structure, but will really want to work together to make it, if we have any chance for it to be successful. And so different coaches felt differently about it. And I felt like some of the GM candidates we interviewed might work differently with different coaches. And once we got down to the last couple names, not named Lane Kiffin, I thought Dave Caldwell was the guy that we had talked to on the GM side that, number one, would match with either one of those two. And number two, brought the level of executive skill and football acumen that could be really successful in that position.
So
I'll add a little inside baseball. So we had a couple face-to-face visits with Jon Sumrall, and the last one we had with him, we actually took Dave with us, and we told Jon ahead of time.
Okay, that answers my next question: is how involved was Jon and aware of who it was going to be?
So we told Jon from the very beginning, this is the model we're going to go down. And he didn't push back. In fact, he said, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'd like to hear more about it. And then the next time we talked more about it. And then the third time we actually brought Dave in to the conversation. They got to meet face to face and start, hey, it's kind of like you're doing a blind date, to be quite honest with you. Hey, this is a really important job. We want you two to work together. What do you think of each other? And they hit it off and got along. And it's interesting, even this week while Jon's been back in New Orleans coaching the Green Wave, and we've been having phone calls, on signing day, he actually went out of his way to say, hey, by the way, Dave Caldwell's doing an awesome job. I mean, I'm so glad that guy's there because he's really good at what he does.
And so Dave Caldwell is working on roster retention, working on prepping for the portal,
evaluations, that whole thing.
Yeah. And it's interesting because this is the sort of time when in the old days, the coach you hired who is still working with his old team, and that happens more often than not when you have a good coordinator or a guy kind of jumping a level. It's interesting that now there's somebody who does that part for them, which I'm sure has made Jon Sumrall's life as the Tulane coach this week a little bit easier.
Yeah, and hey, the coach is still going to have a say on what who gets put on the roster. It's not like the coach. There's not like a wall there,
right?
There's collaboration. There's conversation. There's been guys this week. It's really been interesting to watch even the short term. There's been guys this week that Jon has brought to Dave. Hey, look at this guy. Tell me what you think. And Dave has said, hey, I like this. I don't like that. We'd have, if we could get him for at this point on a contract, this salary, or so to speak. I'm not supposed to use that term, but this rev share number,
right?
Then yeah. If not, I think we can get somebody better in this position in the portal. And it's just that's the way this is supposed to work. You have two professionals who know the sport really well, working together to get the best outcome, to make sure we're using our resources wisely and get the most talented people we can. And
that's something that Dave Caldwell has a lot of experience with. That the college GMs are learning that right now, but he's already done it. Where he's got here's your amount of money, and right. whether you guys end up with a any sort of real cap or not, there's not a money tree where you just pluck it off. Like there's an amount of money to spend. So yeah, I am curious how that process works. Does it make it more efficient? Because you guys are kind of on. I'm trying to think. Oklahoma has this with Jim Nagy, but you're only the second SEC school to have this arrangement.
Yeah, and I actually got on the phone with Randall Stevenson, who's the former AT&T CEO, who's helping Oklahoma through this, and I've talked to Joe Castiglione, my good friend there, because we tried to do some version of this last year, and it just didn't fit with our with where we were at the time, and so I think this is going to become more and more common, and there is a pool of talent. If you imagine it this way, if college football never existed and we just started up at one day, we decided we're going to have a bunch of football teams, a lot of the talent we would go get from a coaching standpoint would be NFL guys, right? We would go find coordinators, position coaches, former NFL head coaches who are no longer current head coaches, and we would be that would be our talent pool. Now, I'm not saying they have to come from the NFL, but there's a lot of really talented people in the NFL who are in a position to come and be effective in the college space. Now, they're going to have to learn. Dave's going to have to surround himself with people who understand the college space and recruiting, because he didn't have to do that when he was in the NFL.
Right, you just draft. They have to come.
Right. So it's not seamless. There is a learning curve that's going to happen, but it just so happens we've all invested in these personnel staffs that happen to know a lot about recruiting and college football. We're just putting an executive over that to make sure going forward that is a sustainable model that can take a load off the coach, so Jon Sumrall can focus on leading his 105 guys to the best of his ability.
Well, you mentioned you've been sleeping better, so I want to ask you bring Jon Sumrall back to Gainesville on Monday night. He gets introduced. When your head hit the pillow that night, what did it feel like?
It's we still have a lot of work to do, but it's hard to explain that what your body feels like and your emotions feel like when you have such an important position to fill and you haven't decided on who that is yet. And for us, it was about a 6 or 7 week period, and it's almost like you're going through an extended virus. You don't sleep well, you don't eat well, and it's not necessarily you're stressed. Actually, I think my stress level was better this time than when I've done it in the past. But it's just like you want to get it done. You have like a big homework assignment that's weighing on you,
all consuming. Yeah.
And that's all you're thinking about, and you want to turn it in and get the A. And so when Jon said he was coming and we got that signed, that was that was a happy day. And then then we had to navigate all the PR piece and the storm that came from the Lane news and navigating that. But you knew that at some point all that was going to shift, because I knew Gator Nation was going to see in Jon Sumrall what me and Duke and Danny saw in him.